You're sitting across from a man named Eli in a farmhouse outside Charm, Ohio, and he is telling you about his grandfather. His grandfather worked a 200-acre farm until he was 103, walked the fence line every morning, sharpened his own tools, remembered everything, died in his sleep at 107 with no diagnosed illness, no prescription medications, no hospital record of any kind beyond a broken wrist he sustained falling from a fence post at age 71. Eli is 74 years old himself and looks, without exaggeration, like a man in his mid-50s. His hands are the hands of someone who works hard every day. His eyes are clear. His recall during our 3-hour conversation is precise and sequential and occasionally humbling. He eats the same diet his grandfather ate. His grandfather ate the same diet his grandfather ate. 4 generations of men on the same land eating the same food, and not one of them has appeared in a hospital record for anything that mattered until the last decade of a very long life. This diet was documented in full by a nutritional biochemist at the University of Michigan named Dr. Harold Voss in 1962. Voss spent 14 months embedded in Holmes County collecting dietary records, blood samples, and longitudinal health data across 89 Amish households. His findings were submitted to the National Institutes of Health as part of a broader rural health study. The NIH filed the report. They did not publish it. 3 months after submission, Dr. Voss died of a cardiac event at 51 years old. His research assistant, a doctoral student named Margaret Fenwick, attempted to publish the findings independently through the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 1964. The journal returned the submission with a note that the methodology required revision. Fenwick revised and resubmitted. The journal did not respond. She resubmitted a 3rd time in 1966. She received a letter informing her that the subject matter fell outside the journal's current editorial focus. She kept every piece of correspondence. Her daughter donated the full file to the Bentley Historical Library at the University of Michigan in 2001. The file is cataloged. The findings are in it. And what Voss documented in Holmes County in 1962 is so fundamentally different from everything the USDA has told you to eat for the last 70 years that a senior nutrition researcher at Cornell who reviewed the Voss file told me off the record that if this diet were a pharmaceutical compound, it would represent the most significant medical discovery of the 20th century. Here is the number that changes everything. The average American life expectancy is 76.4 years according to the CDC's most recent published data. That number has been declining for a decade. The Holmes County Amish community, in a demographic analysis conducted through Ohio State University's Rural Health Program in 2018, examining death records from 1970 through 2015, showed a median age of death of 89.2 years for men and 91.7 years for women across the study population. Those numbers alone are remarkable. What is more remarkable is the distribution. The Holmes County data contains a statistically anomalous cluster of deaths occurring past the age of 100 at a rate approximately 12 times higher than the national average for a population of equivalent size, 12 times. And within that cluster, the researchers found something they put in a footnote and did not discuss in the body of the paper. They found 7 documented cases of individuals dying past the age of 110, verified through county death records, with no recorded diagnosis of any age-related degenerative disease at time of death. 7 people in one county who lived past 110 with nothing wrong with them. The footnote is 4 sentences long. The paper's conclusion section does not mention it. The food industry's influence over nutritional science in America begins with a specific moment and a specific amount of money, and both are documented. In 1967, the Sugar Research Foundation, which was the lobbying arm of the American sugar industry, paid 3 Harvard nutrition scientists the equivalent of approximately $50,000 in today's dollars to publish a review of existing research on dietary fat, sugar, and cardiovascular disease. The review, published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1967, concluded that fat was the primary dietary driver of heart disease and that sugar's role was negligible. That review shaped 50 years of American dietary policy, the food pyramid you grew up with, The low-fat movement of the 1980s, the explosion of low-fat, high-sugar processed foods that followed, all of it traces back to 3 scientists and $50,000 in a review that was designed to reach a predetermined conclusion. This is not a fringe claim. It was documented in a 2016 paper published in JAMA Internal Medicine by researchers at the University of California, San Francisco, who obtained the Sugar Research Foundation's internal documents through historical archive research. The New York Times covered it. The scientists involved were dead. Nobody was held accountable. The dietary guidelines they corrupted are still the foundation of USDA nutritional recommendations today. Voss knew this was happening in real time. His 1962 field notes, which are part of the Bentley Library file, contain a passage in which he writes that the dietary pattern he was observing in Holmes County was so contrary to the emerging consensus in American nutritional science that he anticipated significant institutional resistance to publication. He wrote that sentence in 1962, 5 years before the Sugar Research Foundation paid Harvard to manufacture that consensus. Harold Voss saw it coming, and it found him anyway. Here's what the Amish in Holmes County actually eat. The foundation of the diet is raw and fermented dairy, not pasteurized, not homogenized, not the product that comes in a plastic jug from a confinement dairy operation and has been heated to 161 degrees Fahrenheit to kill everything in it, including the enzymatic activity that makes dairy digestible and nutritionally complete. Raw milk from grass-fed cows containing intact fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K2, active lactase enzymes, beneficial bacterial cultures, and a fat profile dramatically different from grain-fed dairy because the fatty acid composition of milk changes fundamentally based on what the cow eats. K2 is the nutrient the rest of this story turns on, and it is the nutrient American nutritional guidelines have systematically ignored since the 1950s. Vitamin K2 is not the same as vitamin K1, which is the clotting factor found in leafy greens that you may have heard about in relation to blood thinners. K2 is a separate compound that acts as a biological traffic director for calcium in the human body. Without adequate K2, calcium absorbed from food and supplements does not go to bones and teeth where it belongs. It deposits in arterial walls and soft tissue. Arterial calcification is the primary mechanism of cardiovascular disease. Osteoporosis is calcium leaving bones. Arterial disease is calcium arriving in arteries. Both conditions are, at their biochemical root, K2 deficiency diseases, and the American diet has been functionally K2 deficient since the food industry replaced grass-fed animal products with grain-fed alternatives and raw dairy with pasteurized dairy in the post-war period. K2 is found almost exclusively in the fat of grass-fed ruminant animals and in certain fermented foods. The Amish diet is built almost entirely on exactly those foods: raw grass-fed dairy, pasture-raised beef and pork fat, fermented vegetables, aged raw milk cheeses in which bacterial fermentation concentrates K2 to levels far above the source milk. The Holmes County Amish eat these foods 3 times a day, every day of their lives, from birth to death, and their arteries, based on the cardiovascular screening data collected by the Ohio State Rural Health Study, show calcification rates at age 70 that are comparable to what American clinical standards would expect in a healthy 40-year-old. Voss measured K2 intake across his 89 Holmes County households in 1962 and calculated average daily consumption at approximately 380 micrograms. The current U.S. dietary reference intake for all forms of vitamin K combined is 120 micrograms for adult men and 90 micrograms for adult women. The Amish were consuming more than 3 times the total recommended intake of a nutrient the guidelines barely distinguish from its better-known relative. From a food source, the guidelines actively discourage, and living to 107 doing it. The second pillar of the Holmes County diet is fermentation, and it goes far beyond the sauerkraut Americans associate with German heritage cooking. Every Amish household in Voss's study maintained what the community calls a living pantry. Fermented beet kvass consumed daily as a digestive tonic. Lacto-fermented vegetables of every variety prepared without vinegar, using only salt, and the wild lactobacillus cultures present on the vegetable skins, the same bacterial families that colonize a healthy human gut and produce the short-chain fatty acids that regulate intestinal barrier integrity, immune function, and neurological signaling. Fermented grain preparations in which flour is soaked for 12 to 24 hours before baking, a process that neutralizes phytic acid, the anti-nutrient in grains that blocks mineral absorption and contributes to the zinc, magnesium, and iron deficiency that underlies immune dysfunction in the majority of the American population. The Holmes County women Voss interviewed described the soaking of grain as something their grandmothers had done without exception, and that stopping it would have been as unthinkable as not salting meat. It was not a health practice in their understanding, it was simply how food was prepared. The fact that it happens to dramatically improve the nutritional bioavailability of every grain product they consumed was not something they theorized about. They just did it because their grandmothers did it, and their grandmothers' grandmothers did it, and nobody had yet told them it was unnecessary. The third pillar is fat, specifically animal fat, and specifically the fat that the American Heart Association told you in 1961 would kill you in a dietary guideline recommendation that was based on research funded by the vegetable oil industry that replaced animal fat in the American diet and has generated over $90 billion in annual revenue ever since. The Holmes County Amish cook exclusively in lard, tallow, and butter. They have always cooked this way. They will always cook this way because the idea of replacing those fats with a refined industrial seed oil extracted from soybeans using hexane solvent and deodorized at high heat to remove the rancid smell it develops during processing is not something that has penetrated a community that makes its own food from animals it raised on its own land. Lard from a pasture-raised pig contains more vitamin D per tablespoon than a glass of fortified commercial milk. Beef tallow contains K2, conjugated linoleic acid, and a saturated fat profile that human metabolism has been processing efficiently for the entire span of human existence on Earth. The seed oils that replace them are industrially processed products that have existed in the human diet for approximately 100 years, and that cellular biology research published through the NIH's own PubMed database consistently associates with elevated oxidative stress markers, mitochondrial dysfunction, and systemic inflammatory load. Eli's family has never owned a bottle of vegetable oil. He told me this with the same casual certainty the woman in Millersburg used to describe her plant preparations. Not as a health philosophy, as a simple description of what is in his kitchen and what is not. The fourth pillar is what the Holmes County diet does not contain, and this is where Voss's 1962 findings were most explosive and most threatening to the industry that made sure they stayed in a filing cabinet for 40 years. 0 ultra-processed food, 0 refined sugar beyond occasional raw honey and whole fruit in season, 0 refined flour in the sense that all grain products are whole grain and fermented before consumption, 0 industrial seed oils, 0 synthetic preservatives, colorings, flavor enhancers, or the 10,000 other compounds the FDA has granted GRAS status, generally recognized as safe, largely on the basis of manufacturer self-reporting rather than independent safety testing. The American food supply contains approximately 10,000 additives approved under the GRAS framework. Fewer than 200 of them have been independently tested for safety by any party without a financial interest in the outcome. The Amish in Holmes County consume none of them. Their food contains ingredients that have been in the human diet for thousands of years, prepared using methods that have been in continuous use for hundreds, grown on land their families have managed for generations without synthetic chemical inputs. Voss wrote in his 1962 field notes that the Holmes County diet represented an uncontrolled longitudinal experiment in traditional human nutrition, of a scale and duration that could not be ethically replicated in a clinical setting, and that the health outcomes observed in the population constituted evidence of a quality that nutritional science would spend decades attempting to produce artificially in controlled trials. He was right. The controlled trials have been running for 60 years. The results have been inconsistent, contradictory, and endlessly manipulated by industry funding. The uncontrolled experiment in Holmes County has been running for 200 years, and the results are sitting in the county death records and in the clear eyes of a 74-year-old man named Eli who looks 55 and whose grandfather worked a fence line at 103. The Bentley Historical Library at the University of Michigan holds the Voss file. The catalog number is available through their online finding aid. The Sugar Research Foundation documents are in JAMA Internal Medicine, Volume 176, Issue 11, published November 2016. The Ohio State Rural Health Study footnote about the 7 individuals who lived past 110 is in a paper published through the Journal of Rural Health in 2019. All of it is there. All of it is findable. None of it has changed what the USDA recommends you eat for breakfast. Eli walked me to my car when I left. It was late afternoon, and he had already put in 8 hours of physical labor on his farm. He was not tired in any visible way. He shook my hand with a grip that reminded me I spend most of my day sitting in a chair. He said, "We eat what God made, and we work what God gave us, and we don't complicate it beyond that." 4 generations. The same land, the same food, the same result. The diet is not a secret in Holmes County. It never was. It was a secret from you, kept by a funding structure and a regulatory apparatus that could not afford for you to know that the most effective longevity intervention in documented American history costs nothing, requires no prescription, no supplement protocol, no wellness program, and no product of any kind beyond the same food human beings ate for 1,000 years before an industry decided to improve it and sell it back to you at a price that has been slowly reducing the number of years you have left to pay it. Drop your state in the comments. Tell me what you eat for breakfast and what your grandparents ate for breakfast, because that gap, that single generational gap in one meal, tells the story of everything that changed and everything that was taken. And if you have a grandparent or great-grandparent who lived well past 90 in full health, tell me what they ate, because I already know what the answer is going to be, and I want you to see how many times it appears in the comments before you start to understand what that means. Next week, I'm going to show you how the Amish generate $5,000 a month from a garden that runs itself, using a layered planting system so efficient that once it is established, it requires less than 2 hours of weekly attention, produces year-round income from a 1/4 acre of land, and has been deliberately kept out of every mainstream farming publication, every agricultural extension program, and every USDA outreach initiative, because the agency that is supposed to support small farmers receives $340 million annually from the industrial agriculture lobby that cannot compete with it.